used in Niger too. And so maybe if you could, I don't know, just give us a little bit of, overview of your research and also what is that you've been doing in all of these places in very broad terms. I know it's challenging also because you've been on so many projects lately, but just so that we can start the conversation and then we can go into that into a little bit more depth.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you very much, Raquel, for having me with you this afternoon. And thanks to the IN-CTSS network for organizing this event. It is a great pleasure for me to be here. And I don't know, I come with a very humble perspective of what I can bring to the conversation. I will do my very, very best today to discuss a little bit together some of the, the event is framed in terms of challenges in doing fieldwork. I am a qualitative ethnographic researcher. Mostly I am in critical security studies. And I will be more than thrilled to answer your questions. Also, if there are some master students or some PhD students concerning methodology, ethics, concerns, and anything that might be helpful also for your studies and your research. My own research started in 2017 with my PhD, focusing on gender dynamics in the insurgency, especially focusing on the Central Sahel, so Mali and Niger. So the idea was to look at the roles, the motivations, and the challenges that women face under jihadi governance. So I focus mostly on jihadist insurgency, on Al-Qaeda and IS affiliated groups, looking at the place of women within this group, outside this group, and the impacts that the insurgencies have. And at the same time, I looked at the other side of the coin, as any critical terrorism scholar would say, that insurgency and counterinsurgency are, of course, related. So I looked at the counterterrorism practices from the side of the UN and the EU, looking at the discourses and the practices on gender mainstreaming and how they took into account the gender dimension. To do this, I did some fieldwork, both in Mali and Niger. Of course, there is a big difference in terms of the time that you have during your PhD and the time that you have to do fieldwork after your PhD. Now, so I defended the PhD in 2021. And during the PhD, I could spend around, let's say, 8 months in the field. As you might remember, in the meantime, also COVID struck, so that really impacted the time that I could spend in Niger the second time around. And after this research, after I started working on other postdoc projects, focusing mostly on one on negotiation with jihadist groups. So looking at the dynamics of negotiation and mediation with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State groups in the Sahel. And looking also at norms, at jurisprudence norms that are entangled in the negotiation process, and as well as and this research was again in Mali and Niger. And then I've carried out some research on the role of traditional religious authorities in peace building, which was mostly focused in Mauritania and Niger. And then during the last year, we had a project on the jihadist expansion from the Sahel towards the Gulf of Guinea. And that piece of research brought me to Ghana. So reasons for non-expansion, and comparing with cases in northern Benin, Guinea, Guinea-Conakry, and then Senegal as well. So these were a little bit, and yes, lately I've been to Chad in January, in the north of Chad, but it was a preliminary field looking at the rebel dynamics in the north of Chad, and which didn't really have connection with my more core agenda on jihadist dynamics, so to speak. And yeah, more or less, I've been trying to do ethnographic fieldwork, which entails a mixture of qualitative interviews and participant observation to the extent that it's possible.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, actually, I should have said that at the beginning. Sorry, nerves sometimes play tricks on us. That yeah, so I'm going to be asking some questions, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience. If you have any, you can also share in the chat button. Obviously, we'll try and have a space for you to ask questions to Laura directly and so on. So thank you so much for the overview. I mean, it's been opening up so many questions that I could ask you, but I think that maybe based on what you were saying and also knowing your work a little bit, one of the questions I was thinking of is, in the end, all of these projects that you've been on have led you to interview, interact, and being a participant of an observer into very different contexts and to interact with very different actors. So you've been somehow interviewing, if you allow me to say so, across the spectrum from institutional, civil society, armed contexts, and so on. You have been interviewing institutional actors, as I was saying, when doing specifically your work on the Ph.D. with gender mainstreaming, civil society representatives, somehow displaced communities at some point, people affected by detention and prison systems, specifically women, if I remember correctly, jihadist leaders, or at least members or affiliated individuals with what we can call jihadist groups and so on. So I don't know, would you maybe be able to spend a little bit of time discussing that? So how do you go from, to deal with this whole big spectrum of very different actors? I could even ask you the very easy question on, who's most challenging to interview? And then how do you deal with radically different positions among your interlocutors when building your analysis? So how do you deal with all this very different spectrum? How do you treat their accounts into your work? And so on. So what kind of knowledge they produced, and how do you deal with all of these different positions and contexts within your work? So if you can just give us, it's overview of all of these, and then how you work across the spectrum, because I guess this is also very challenging, right?
Thank you very much, Alicia, for this very, very interesting question. In the meantime, I heard a fire alarm, but I'm not I'm not moving for the moment. I will stay put as long as somebody will call me eventually, hopefully. And so it's true that so in my research throughout these years, I've had to interview different interlocutors from civil society activists, mostly women civil society organizations, institutional actors, of course, military actors and policymakers, diplomats, fellow researchers, fellow scholars, journalists, former jihadists, current jihadists in prison, both men and women. And so the idea, of course, to have such a broad range of actors with whom to interact is of course to get different perspectives, right? Because you're not doing a survey with the same questionnaires that you administer to the same 100 people, and you have the same questionnaires. So the idea is to gather data from different accounts and different perspectives, and and then you triangulate your data based on the literature and the information that, of course, you gathered. There is, of course, the question of my positionality towards the interlocutors and how this varies also in terms of access, because, of course, there is a question of how my positionality as a woman researcher in such a militarized, male-centric environment, security-centered environment shapes the kind of interactions that that I can have, of course, and it also shapes the kind of information that are shared in those contexts, whereby. Of course, in my experience, while I was doing my research on gender, this dynamic had a twofold consequence. For instance, with policymakers, both EU, UN level, they would see me as less threatening because I was a woman researching on softer subjects. So in a way that also the access and the type of information that I would that I would get. It was seen also with some local military as well. In a way, I was since I was not researching what they perceived as really hardcore counterterrorism security subjects, then I was maybe it was different. I was seen less as a threat, and at the same time, being a woman, it would then reshape completely my interaction with local women civil society, local women from the communities, former women jihadists that have been convicted, and we had completely different conversations. Of course, as a researcher, you wear in every interview is a different creature. As your normal everyday interaction, they change based on the speaker that you interact with, right? And so it would be as if the researcher wears a different hat if you are meeting with the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Mauritania, or if you are sitting under a tree in the middle of northern Mali talking about everyday violence with a local community member. Of course, everything changes. For the most difficult group that I interviewed, it's probably not so much former jihadists as well as religious figures. And there, me as a woman, it was particularly complicated. For instance, with fundamentalists, with Salafist religious leaders in Mauritania and in Mali and Niger, I was always accompanied by basically by a male colleague, because they wouldn't speak to me alone. They wouldn't even look at me in the eyes. So, of course, I had to be chaperoned by a male colleague that could ask questions. And probably interviewing religious figures was a little bit complicated, as well as, of course, from an emotional point of view, interviewing former jihadists as well. And I can also tell you some anecdotes, if you want, about both of them that are fairly funny.
Yes, if it's if it's safe to share.
Yes, of course. So when with my colleagues, we interviewed a person that was pretty high up in the ranking in Al-Qaeda, and we did these interviews at his place. It took months to actually establish a contact via, and was so it takes time also to build access to some sources, and yeah, I was fully covered. From of course, I was wearing a full niqab, and I remember that during the interview, at some point it was 40 degrees. It was really hot, and at some point the veil falls down a little bit, like here. It was like this 2 centimeters of neck showing, and the interviews was stopped, and because this position made my interlocutor feel a little bit uncomfortable. So then I had to recompose myself in order to be more presentable and continue the interview. But this shows also that interviews are very, very delicate environments, whereby, of course, there needs to be a safe space for the interviewees, so that they would feel comfortable in sharing their knowledge, their insights, and it's of course a relational process in these terms. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Laura, for sharing. I think that actually I have some questions in mind also, on the theoretical perspective views that we embrace in our work, and how you reconcile that with fieldwork, or the fieldwork you do. But maybe before that, I wanted to go back to some very, I'm not sure if it's just technical, but some of the issues that also are very worrying, usually PhD students, early career researchers, other researchers too, obviously. But at very first, it's very difficult to navigate the ethics, beyond the ethics, and so on. I also want to say that obviously this is 10 years after the assassination of Giulio Regeni, which obviously, being Italians and researchers, I think it's fair that we recall. I had just started my PhD when that happened. I think you arrived like a year later, if I remember correctly. Both at our institution there, and then I think all around the world, these debates on the duty of care, the ethics, procedures, and so on, that were already in place, but again, the debate reopened at least. And so, university ethic procedures are very difficult to navigate, are very challenging sometimes. Obviously, also depends on the context where you are, what is sometimes the image we have of certain contexts, not really always the real risk assessment of what's going on in those contexts. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, so how do you handle ethical dilemmas, both in terms of obviously the university, in terms of even the bureaucracy, and then how do you deal with ethical dilemmas in your own research? Because obviously I mean, some of the things you were mentioning also structure these ethical perspectives, these ethical issues that you need to take in mind. How do you deal with, yes, researching challenging context, and then I'll go to the challenging, but that's for the next questions. Confidentiality, also in interviews when, you know, for example, confidentiality is always shifting, for example, and then if that has impacted on, for example, your published research, has it ever happened to you that you decided not to publish something because of potential harm, even if it was maybe analytical important? So, you know, Mazik, some words on the whole ethics behind the ethics form. So maybe if you could deal first with the university part, which I know that many researchers around the world are worried about that, and then also about your own research when your own field, you know, what happens there, how does ethics enters into that, and all of that. Sorry, I keep on repeating myself, but I think you got the question.
Yeah.
And thank you for touching on this very sensitive matter too, you know, because obviously it's a difficult conversation.
No, it's okay. We are among friends, and it's a real pleasure to answer your very important questions. In terms of the ethical procedures, both for an ethical approval, both for during the PhD and then also in postdocs, so during the project, the research, the ethical approval that you have to have before conducting research for a bigger project. One issue is that sometimes you go through these forms maybe 1 year before actually doing your fieldwork, because it takes an enormous amount of time to get your ethical approval. Then it's also true that some regulations in Italy are, for instance, quite different from the UK environment, where I know that rules are stricter. I don't necessarily know how it is in Spain or Portugal, but there is, of course, not only because of Giulio Regeni, but in general, there is a big reflection on the ethics of doing field work, any research that involves human participants. And what we do is, even if you ask your permission to do your research so long before actually going to the field, so you do a sort of risk assessment. And then what the issue then is, for instance, in the Sahel, the landscape and the context has changed completely since I started in 2017. It was challenging context, because then we can also talk about periphery and research that is done mostly in the capitals, whereby you actually study phenomena that are happening in less secured areas, in the rural areas, and not directly, you're not living exactly in the same area where insecurity is palpable in your everyday life. But besides that, so in terms of you might do a risk assessment that then is completely superseded by the event, and there is nothing to do about it. It's about being cautious that security concern might vary. In the Sahel, since then, the access to the field has completely shifted, and it's very much closed by now. It's very difficult to do field work now after the coup d'etat in Mali, Niger, and Burkina, which has restricted a lot of access. But I mean, we have seen the start of a new war in the Middle East in the span of a week. So we are very much aware that security concerns might vary. Then, so let's say that you are well aware of the risks that there are in the country. Then in dealing with interviews, it's very, very important to reflect, as I said before, on the ethical commitments, especially when researching very sensitive topics. For instance, while researching women's participation in terrorist groups. So there is always the risk of re-traumatizing participants and re-traumatizing the interviewees. So there is a reflection on how do you talk about pain, about everyday lives, and how do you talk about this terrible experience also without re-victimizing the women that that I'm interviewing. So there is also this this balance that has to be struck between finding a way of giving voices to the people that you are interviewing, so acknowledging their agency, while at the same time, of course, so steering away from the idea of portraying marginalized groups and as only victims, but also as actors, and at the same time being very careful about the risk of trauma, of reliving the experiences that they're sharing with the researcher. If I'm talking about, of course, this is not ever the first question in an interview, why did you join Al-Qaeda? But if the answer is connected also to the most of times connected to the loss of a loved one, loss of a brother, loss of the husband, of course, it's very, very sensitive how you treat this kind of information. And there is, before setting the interviews, of course, there is the framework is a confidential framework. So as soon as you sit in the room, that has to be conceived as a safe space. The researcher would then talk about the research, about the positionality, what kind of data, what kind of questions are going to be asked, and what will be the purpose of the research. And this is, and that, of course, all the data is confidential, all the data is anonymous, and will be stored safely. And this is fundamental. And also in my practice, I do something that a lot of other researchers probably don't do, but I choose not to record. This is to me, it has always helped to have a more a safer exchange with my interviewees. Sometimes people ask to be recorded because they show that they don't have anything to hide, but at the same time, I feel that taking notes leaves space for to be more comfortable and more at ease, creating this sort of the idea that I will not do, so I never gather exact quotes or things, things like this, so that it's easier to have freer exchange, especially for very sensitive interviews with women, especially with women that might have experienced violence or trauma in their life. And there is always there is also always this question. You asked me if I chose not to publish something not to harm anyone, and in fact no, because the stories that I gathered are always anonymized, so it would be very, very difficult to actually associate what has been said with the person. It would be so. This was not really one of the main. It was never something that happened. And then there is also besides getting the ethical approved from the university, there is also a local procedure whereby, for instance, I had to get research permits in Mali and in Niger in order to conduct interviews there, because you cannot just access prison of Boko Haram just knocking at the door. So that procedure also took months, and also many attending weddings and and different kinds of gathering, because of course it's a long procedure to get research permits that needs to go through the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Justice, etc., etc. And but it's really important to follow the procedure. Of course, fieldwork is unpredictable, so every researcher has to be flexible, because most likely it will not go exactly as you planned in your mind before going. So you need to be flexible and then readjust according to the circumstances. And yes, and I can continue on this for a long time, but maybe I stop here, and I'm sure you have other questions.
Yeah. We do have a question, but Pau, is it okay if we take it at the end? I have like 2 more questions, Laura, if it's okay. And then our intention is to open the floor. I have one more theoretical question, and then I have one more practical question. I think we can start from the theoretical challenging one, and then we'll go to the more practical one. And then again, we'll be happy to have a conversation with the audience. So obviously this is a network of critical security studies and critical terrorism studies. So we embrace or try to post-colonial, decolonial, feminist positions and all of that. And so, sorry for the whole of that phrasing, I don't want to be disrespectful. But so I was wondering, so from a theoretical point of view, is there such a thing as feminist fieldwork or feminist post-colonial fieldwork, even obviously if we are white women coming from Italy and so on? And how do you think that looks different from a more kind of mainstream kind of fieldwork? Does this entail, I don't know, navigating power differently, challenging discourses related to, for example, I was mentioning, I think I will not have the time to go there, but I know that I awarely reproduce this idea of the challenging context, for example, in the title of the event. We wanted to catch a little bit of attention, but obviously we have plenty of problems with that label too. And so, yeah, sorry, I'm detouring here, but so again, what do you think would a feminist, post-colonial, critical fieldwork look like, and what are the differences with more mainstream kind of fieldwork, ethnography, and so on?
Thank you very much, Alicia, for this amazing question. I reflected a lot on this, and I do think that there is such a thing as feminist fieldwork, which is very different from mainstream IR. There is a lot of literature that we all know on conflict studies and how to research violence in challenging context, but doing feminist fieldwork means it comes also from another ontological and epistemological assumptions that are, of course, different for decolonial, postcolonial, and critical feminist scholars. From an ontological perspective, I think that there is a very deep reflection on this, and this you might find in a piece that was published in Millennium last year from a bunch of amazing feminist scholars, Maria Martín de Almagro, Mary Berry, Zalver, and Torrado, and I think that's it. In Millennium, that was called Doing Feminist Research on Conflict, Violence, and Peace, Ethical and Methodological Dilemmas. And basically, they talk about the ethical and the methodological dilemmas that they went through in their research, and it's a brilliant piece if you wanna read it. The idea is that feminist research comes with a different kind of awareness, mostly. For instance, drawing from, there is a book from Achebe that I really advise you to read. Is on, it's called Female Monarch and Merchant Queens in Africa, where she basically asks whose histories, whose stories, and whose archives are we researching. So there is this idea that basically the global north is narrating African history and IR, and also the research which is done through Western tools, and which means that basically re-questions the idea of knowledge extractivism that the global north and privileged researchers do, extracting knowledge from the global south, and then it's the global north that is entitled to do the theorizing, while of course there is a whole reflection on the fact that post-colonial theories take already this standpoint into account, and there is a bunch of literature that we sometimes disregards also in Black African feminism that has already answered most of our research questions have been already answered in some other work that we disregard also from Black African feminists themselves. But the main point is the reflection that also it was one of the main questions that I got in my PhD research, rephrasing a little bit Spivak, no, that talks about let the subaltern speak, which is one of the main goals of feminist research, right? Let the marginalized and the subaltern and the subjugated have a voice. But on the other side, there is the idea, and this is the question that I got, like, who gives you the right to speak for Malian women? Who, as a white, privileged researcher from the global north, allows you to speak for women in Bamako and in Niamey and elsewhere? And I always felt, of course, I reflected on this, and I'm very much aware of my position, but nonetheless, there is this sort of discomfort in acknowledging that we come from a privileged position, in engaging with fieldwork, and there is a feminist component in doing ethnographic fieldwork. That is, in practice, there is awareness, and also there are other feminist ethnographic researchers like Judith Stacy that reflected on the idea that this kind of discomfort is intrinsic in doing feminist work. Because there is some, whereby exploitation in a way is always present in doing ethnographic fieldwork, because there is a certain recognition that some sort of knowledge extraction and is somehow inescapable for it. And this is why feminist researchers reflect a lot on the idea of co-construction of knowledge, which is very, very important also in my research, to the extent that as much as possible, it would be important to include in your research also local researchers, local collaborators, and in order to have a more collaborative construction of co-construction of knowledge. But at the same time, it's very difficult to reflect on the question of how to give back to your interlocutors. Bottom line, the interviewees, they give you their knowledge, their time. Sometimes interviews lasted afternoons, and I had this experience especially with civil society and activists and women activists, and especially in Mali, that would grant me with the opportunity to have, I don't know, their afternoon and to share. Of course, then I would go back several times also to the same interviewee in order to build a relationship as well. I don't want to say friendship, I wish, but at least to have a relational approach and to in a way to give back. And when I remember that in several instances with Malian activists, at the end of this 2, 3, 4 hours time, teas and endless discussion, they would say, thank you very much for being here. And I was always startled, saying, no, I mean, you don't have to thank me. I have to thank you for everything that you shared with me and all your time. And you know that there is, for instance, when I was a PhD student, there is no funding behind. I cannot mobilize funding. I cannot mobilize some, I don't know, yes, funding. I'm not a donor. So there is not this kind of relationship that is in place. And I was, and I always say this because, of course, you don't have to create expectations that since you are a foreign researcher, then there is a sort of trade-off also in terms of fund. And of course, also your PhD thesis most likely is read by 5 people, your jury. So you have this feeling of discomfort whereby how would your time and energy be compensated? Because yes, you granted me a lot, and I am unsure of what I eventually can give back. So I think that kind of embracing this sort of discomfort in power hierarchies and the extent to which you can give back and really honor the time and effort of all your interviewees is part of the doing feminist fieldwork, and of course there is the reflection on how to voice the voice of others without re-traumatizing, re-victimizing, or distorting the trust that your interviewees give you as a researcher, especially when dealing with very, very sensitive topics that revolve around violence, insecurity, everyday life insecurity as well. And yes.
Yes, thank you, Laura. This was very, very, very insightful. As I was saying, I have a very final question, and this can be on-the-spot answers, because I think then we can leave the rest of the time for the floor. But, you know, thinking in very practical terms, so now shifting entirely from the theoretical focus we're taking, let's see, like, so it's likely that we'll have either PhD students or early postdocs in the audience. So I wanted to ask you, if a PhD student is planning fieldwork in a conflict-affected zone, what would be one romantic illusion you would gently dismantle, maybe? What would be some surprises that you think they may find, if any? And what would be the one tip you would give them, just for them to keep in mind? If it's possible to answer these questions like this, because I know obviously also depends very much on all of the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think on the illusion that can be a romantic illusion that can be dismantled, I think that there is part of the discipline doing ethnographic work that sort of romanticizes a bit fieldwork. And of course, any anthropologist would laugh at how we do fieldwork, which is actually calculated in terms of weeks and months, and not years immersed in a community in Papua New Guinea learning the local language. But of course, we use this ethnographic fieldwork in our discipline in another way compared to anthropologists. But as I don't want to say as well as, but similar to anthropology, there is this inclination in the field to a little bit romanticize the idea of fieldwork, but mostly in challenging contexts, like sort of the Indiana Jones kind of researchers, right? And others have already reflected and talked about this. I think it's coming with age that I'm I'm growing older, so I would kind of de-romanticize the idea that doing fieldwork in challenging conditions is a value in and of itself. It's not. It's simply the illusion. There is an illusion of proximity to danger that might be seen as equaling depth and authenticity and academic value, which is not necessarily true in and of itself. It doesn't, if you have slept in the most remote place in a very crappy bed, if you got malaria, it's not a badge of honor. And if you got, yes, some diseases because you were really in the bush, embedded, I mean, it's something that can be taken into account, but the PhD research and doing fieldwork is not a test of courage. There is no judgment if you do fieldwork in Brussels, because you can also do fieldwork at EU institution. I remember that during my PhD years, I was laughing at my colleagues or other people that would do, for instance, European studies. I would do fieldwork in Brussels. I was like, ha, ha, ha. That's not really challenging, is it? Besides surviving the weather, which is a big challenge nonetheless. But there is this idea of romanticizing the field a bit, and which, as I said, is not it's not to be seen as performative fieldwork as such. In terms of but of course, being in the field, it gives you the opportunity to actually, the other side, of course, is that through fieldwork, you have access to living the experiences that otherwise you would not have otherwise. The tip is that it's important to accept that fieldwork never really goes as planned. There are hiccups, things slow down, there is the interviewee doesn't show up, internet doesn't work. There have been constant delays. There is an interviewee that you have been trying to catch for 3 months and she doesn't show up. It all happens, and I think that a tip would be to actually embrace failure during fieldwork, because it's normal. It's part of the research, which doesn't necessarily mean that you are a bad researcher. Just researching conflict, post-conflict, conflict-affected areas is very, very complicated. So there might be things that don't go exactly as planned. On the other side, it's really important to plan carefully before going. So contrary to my PhD research, but it's really important to plan carefully your fieldwork, both in terms of access, but also in terms of your network, scheduling the interviews as much as possible, and having a more structured plan of interviews that it can, of course, change. And of course, there is also the idea that fieldwork in a way could be ongoing. So it's not that you do fieldwork from the 3rd of March till the 15th of March and then it's finished. It comes also in loops. You go back to the field. You can go back and forth. It's something that has to be constructed in time. It takes time, and it takes different iteration also with the same people in order also to build a network and to be also, I wouldn't say consider as a member of the community, but from what we were saying before, also to have a less extractive approach to research is really important, to take the time to build relationships on the field. So probably you will have first some informal interactions, and then you go back to the same person to actually do an interview, and then maybe you will go back several months afterwards, because of course fieldwork is sort of a circular approach, and that and it's also ongoing, because you will do your field work. The best practice is that after you do your interviews, then you transcribe your notes right away, and you start nourishing the reflection right away during your after you do your interviews. There, Alexandra is having a problem, but I don't know what it is. And so you transcribe your notes while on the field, and then there will be a process where you actually sit at home. Maybe, hopefully it's not COVID time, and you can actually also have some other social interactions. So you sit with your data, you rework, and you nourish your reflections, which then can continue in time. I don't know if there was another part of the question, Alicia, that I didn't answer.
No, Laura, I think it's actually, oh, thank you very much. I think it's actually time that maybe we open the floor to the audience. And I was thinking that since you've been speaking for quite a lot now, maybe we can try and take a couple of questions so that you have the time to breathe in the meanwhile. Let's see if maybe Pau is still here, and if he wants to ask the question he had earlier. And then maybe if there's any other questions. Okay, I see he's typing. So maybe in the meanwhile, while he types, is there any other thing from, oh, Jana, yes, please. And then we'll read out. Yes, thank you, Paul. Yes, you're right. And then I'll read out.
Oh yeah, can I speak words first?
Of course, yes. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. It was very interesting. I'm actually now on the field work, so it cannot be more useful for me than now. I'm a PhD student from Ghent University, from rainy Belgium, and I'm based in Kazakhstan now. It's not a conflict impacted country, but nevertheless, I'm researching quite a sensitive topic. And so my question to you is, you a little bit elaborated on how to access stakeholders. And my question was about policymakers in particular and the government, because I was told by a hosting professor straight away that don't even try to contact government because they will not speak about this. So that was a bit, I would say, putting me off a little bit. But my question to you, do you have any insights or best practices how to frame a sensitive topic to any stakeholder or in particular policymaker, how to make them be open and interested to speak about it? Yeah, so any advice on this, I would appreciate.
Thank you, Jana. Yes, Laura, let's see maybe if there's one more question. Because I feel bad because we kept you talking for like an hour straight.
No, I can be here until whenever you want.
Anybody else that would like to ask anything, something to Laura? Okay, well, maybe Laura, then maybe you can start answering this. We'll see if Pau in the end manages to write down his question, and then we'll see.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alicia, and thank you very much, Jana. Good luck with your fieldwork in Kazakhstan. I mean, it must be, I mean, it's not conflict affected area, but it's still very, very interesting. You didn't specify the research you're doing, so can you tell me a little bit which is your research topic?
My PhD explores regionalism and sanctions, actually both in African context and in Central Asian, and I've been to West Africa as well. And I would say from my first impressions that Africans are sometimes much easier to reach out to because of their openness. And in Central Asia, I find some sort of a bit of more formality in all sorts of interactions, but specifically I explore sanctions and how the region is impacted by sanctions against Russia. So because of all these questions of circumvention of sanctions, it's quite sensitive for anyone to speak about it.
Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification. It's a very interesting topic and indeed very, very sensitive. So take what I say con grano salis, so with a pinch of salt, because for instance, what I can tell you about my experience in accessing governmental and policymakers, it's been really interesting to see, for instance, the Sahel change from democratic regimes to turning to authoritarian regimes, and which meant that the public access and the civic space was restricted a lot, and it was really difficult for me to also see how societal dynamics change and how the networks of not informants, interlocutors that I had for many years then were in a condition of unease to speak with a foreign researcher because the context changed, because under an authoritarian regime there is a lot of surveillance, and it's the same kind of dynamic that I observed in Guinea, in Conakry, last October, where it was extremely difficult to access government sources and policymakers because, of course, it's really difficult to get access, even with security forces. With the police, they make me go, I don't know, 4 times to the same office, and every time they said that I missed a document, and every time they were making up excuses on the document that was missing from the end. At the end, of course, when they bring you from one office to the other and they keep you walking for an hour, it means that they eventually don't want to talk to you. So how do you navigate this difficult context? Is that, of course, you cannot force the people that have closed doors, right? So you cannot, I don't know, infiltrate a restaurant and go to parties, because then you might eventually find the EU diplomat that you have been longing to interview, because of course interviews have to take place in an interview context. So the idea is that if you cannot access those doors through other contexts, I'm guessing you're reaching them through emails, and they might disregard emails. Try to reach them through some local networks. Try to have, I don't know if you have a local friend, or collaborators that can ease your access in this sphere that is right now precluded to you. So also lots of more senior researchers eventually rely on fixers that might open doors for them, especially for what concerns government and policymakers in a difficult context where you don't necessarily have the means to access. If it's impossible to get this intermediary that might help you, then the idea is to gather as much information as possible from other sources. So interviewing analysts, journalists, security analysts, even if they will not be your primary source, but you need to use proxies. A lot of times, even if I manage to interview jihadists, some jihadist combatants, always the recurring narrative in terrorism studies is why you didn't interview more jihadists, because it's basically not really feasible and not really possible. So if you
Laura?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought I froze.
Yeah, no, it disconnected for a minute, my internet, and you were all gone. So I thought that I exhausted time on Teams, and you said goodbye, and yes, sorry, but I will be brief on this. So try to get some proxies that might eventually help you in answering the question that you have, that of course have direct experience on this on the topic that you want to frame. And eventually, in terms of framing the topic, the idea is always to frame it in less sensitive and less harmful ways. So you might present this doesn't mean that you don't disclose the aim of your research, but in terms of framing, you might focus on, you might put a spin to it, and you might focus more on the idea of regionalism and studying regionalism in Africa and Central Asia. And then also during interviews, the more sensitive questions come a little bit at the end of the interview. So maybe you really start from very broad, general, non-sensitive issues, and then seeing also how the interview progresses, you go into the to the meats and bones of the aim of your research. These are just a few tips.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I actually wanted to say, I don't know if Iana had any follow-up questions. Okay, we have something, I think, along the same lines from Pau. If it's okay, I'll read it out, and maybe we can see if there's one more question so that we can group at least two together. But let me read this out, and then we'll give the word to Celia. So Pau was asking, as I prepare for my ethnographic fieldwork in an environmentally sensitive area in the Gambia, I would appreciate your advice on how to approach local research procedures responsibly. My main objective is to work closely with community members and civil society organizations, building relationships based on trust and safety, and ideally promote participatory research. While I am fully committed to complying with all ethical requirements, I am unsure how to navigate local national governmental authorization processes without unintentionally affecting community trust. I am also concerned about the possibility that official positions from the local or national authorities could restrict or even prevent the research. What would be the most responsible way to proceed in order to assure ethical compliance while safeguarding safe and meaningful community engagement? And so, as I was saying, this is Pau's question. I think you touched on some of these things already, but maybe you can do a short recap. But in the meanwhile, maybe if it's okay, Laura, we can also get the question from Celia. Yes, Celia.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my first question, well, first of all, thank you so much for organizing this session. It's been really interesting, and I'm definitely learning a lot from your experience in fieldwork. So my first question is somehow related to the last one, and it is, how did you navigate cultural differences in all the countries you have done fieldwork? Because I guess there are important and significant differences between Italy and Mali, Nigeria, and all the countries you've been to. So how have you managed to cope with this difference in order to be respectful to your interviewees and etc.? Any remark you would like to do about that? And then my second question is also related to interviews, and it is whether taking notes has prevented you from a flow in the interview, or if there have been times where you have had to stop taking notes in order to engage with the interviewee as well and retake them later. And if also taking notes is a way to know later when to end the revision process, because as researchers, we also find many difficulties to know when to stop, right? Revising all the fieldwork. So has taking notes been helpful in order to know when to stop? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Celia, and Laura, whenever you're ready. I don't know if
Thank
you
you
want to
so
drink
much.
some water. You've been going.
It's okay. It's okay.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for both your questions. It's really nice to see a community of young researchers that are interested in doing ethically responsible fieldwork and that you are reflecting on this kind of topics is really refreshing. And to Pau and the idea of how to deal with community engagement in a responsible way and safeguarding all the ethical research procedures. I don't know specifically for the Gambia, because yes, I've been to Senegal, but I jumped over the Gambia. So I don't know specifically what are the research requirements for the country. As a PhD student, you are a PhD student, right? Yes. Yes, I think I remember. As a PhD student, I would advise you, first of all, to get in touch with the local research center, the local university, and get a visiting fellowship. Like this is the very first thing that I would do instead of just organizing the whole field work on your own. Having an affiliation with a local research center, a local university, start to get some contacts with professors and researchers that already work on civil society engagement in environmental and concerns, more or less, that deal with the same topics that you're doing your own research, and which can definitely help your research, because they will know what is the research procedure, if you need a research permit or not. They will they will be useful also to have, if you don't have prior contacts in the Gambia, in the country, it will be them that would eventually help you to start with your field work and gathering contacts in place, and so that you can start building your network. Third of all, you will be in a research environment with fellow colleagues that will have other contacts, and will, if everything goes well in a research center or the university department, you will have a desk, which will also be very fruitful to do your research. So I think that in terms of starting to plan your fieldwork, the first step is, of course, already reflecting on how to do it responsibly and ethically, and you're already doing that. And second of all, get in contact with some local researchers so you can get an affiliation, and everything will go a lot smoother than just getting a ticket and doing everything on your own. Of course, I'm talking about research center universities because, for instance, my university privileged this kind of visiting fellowships, but you can also do maybe for your university, it's also okay to engage with some civil society work, maybe doing working for an NGO at the same time that you're doing your fieldwork, so that you can also have you can also do some participant observation, for instance. In this way, you can have direct experience of their work in the environmental field while also doing your research. Of course, this would mean that you have to combine two hats, but it's also a way to get access and engage meaningfully with the host community. I see people leaving, so I will reply now to Celia before everyone disappears. How did I navigate cultural differences? This is what you do in your first year of PhD, reading as much literature as possible, so you get completely drunk on the literature. So then you have this idea that you know everything and that you're exhausted all the literature and you're ready to do fieldwork, and you eventually are ready to go on the field. So so then you would then have practical experiencing and basically learning day by day. So, and learning basically an approach that is, I work very inductively, so not having things that are already prefixed in my mind. Everything is mostly grounded theory, mostly learning, and also learning by doing. And of course, there are things that you cannot know. There might be things that are culturally different, but more or less you know that if you interview an imam, you would then cover your head, and this has nothing to do with women's subjugation. I mean, it's also an idea of respecting the religious figure that you have in front of you. If you go to local communities and they offer you food and drinks, of course you drink them, even if it will not be the most health-wise thing to do. And so there are things that you would just do in terms of learning by learning, also in the field with experience. Voila. And for the interviews, I mean, how to conduct interviews, it's a very personal thing. And we might have all different approaches in that. There might be people that are more comfortable using a recorder, because then you think, oh no, I missed this super important part of the interviews. Oh my God, I missed this super important data because he was talking, she was talking too fast. And so there really depends how you're most comfortable with. It also depends on your methodological background. If you do discourse analysis, of course, you need the transcript and you need the statement, because wording matters, and you cannot really do exact critical discourse analysis if you're just taking notes while the interviewee is talking. To me, I would just find it more at ease to take down notes, also because I do take notes of the environment, and not only the context setting, not only the feedback of the interviewees, the different dynamics of the interviews, or everything that is context related. But I also take down notes on my emotions. So how, for instance, if there are some things that made me uncomfortable, if the interview, if things have, I don't know, if it's getting angry, if I'm getting too emotional as well, because I'm aware that interviews and this kind of data is never, and it can never be neutral, but also acknowledging the emotions and the information and the contextual information during an interviews, it allows me to then frame the interviews later and to reflect on the kind of context that where the interviews took place. And I think that it's very meaningful data. Voila.
Thank you, Laura, so much. I think in Italy and Spain, you also need to drink whatever you are offered.
You are very concerned about me getting dehydrated. I will drink because I see you're getting concerned.
I don't know. I mean, you know, that if they offer you something here too, you have to drink. There's no way you can reject that. So maybe there's not too much of a cultural gap. No, but thank you very much, everybody. I think Laura will actually come to 1 hour and a half webinar. So I think we can call it a webinar, unless there's some very final points that you would like to make or any very final thing that you would like to say. You don't have to. No, okay, no, I'm kidding. No, I think, I mean, with at 1 hour and a half webinar, so maybe it's just time to thank everybody for being here. And obviously, thank you, Laura, for being so nice, you know, and accepting our invitation and be very open and engaged with the questions, with answering all of these issues that come to mind when we discuss fieldwork. We really hope that it was a useful event. And in fact, you know, Raquel and I are trying and again, putting forward the network, as you know, if you've been following us, and we'll be very open to also hear from any of you if you have any suggestions or things that you would like